The first time Lily spilled water past the Alpha King's cell, the guards did not notice. She had been walking the lower corridor for 3 weeks by then, carrying the evening pail from the well to the prisoner's block. It was a chore no one wanted. The air down there was damp and cold, and the stone walls seemed to hold the chill of every winter that had ever passed through Thornwood. But Lily did not mind the cold. She minded the silence. The cell at the far end was different from the others. It was larger, yes, and the bars were thicker, but that was not what made it different. What made it different was the man inside. He sat with his back against the far wall, legs stretched out before him, wrists bound in iron cuffs that were chained to a ring bolted into the floor. He did not pace like the other prisoners. He did not beg. He did not shout insults at the guards when they passed. He simply sat and waited and watched. No one had told Lily his name when she first started the chore, but she had heard the whispers in the castle kitchens, the way the servants lowered their voices when they spoke of him. The Alpha King, the one who had led the Thornwood pack for nearly 20 years before the coup, the one who had been betrayed by his own council, drugged in his own hall, and dragged down into these cells while his enemies divided his lands among themselves. That was 6 months ago, and still he sat. Lily had never spoken to him. It was not allowed. The guards had made that clear on her first night. No talking to the prisoner in the end cell. No lingering. No eye contact. She was to walk past, fill the water trough in the common cell block, and leave. That was all. And for the first 3 weeks, that was exactly what she did. But on the 22nd night, something changed. She had been drawing water from the well when the rope slipped, and the pail dropped back down with a splash that soaked her apron. She cursed under her breath, a habit she had picked up from the stable boys, and pulled the rope again, more carefully this time. By the time she reached the lower corridor, the pail was full to the brim, and the water sloshed with every step she took. She was walking past the Alpha King's cell when her foot caught on a loose stone in the floor. She stumbled. Water spilled over the rim of the pail, splashing across the stones just outside his bars. Lily froze. She looked up instinctively before she could stop herself, and she saw him looking back. He was not a young man. His hair was dark but streaked with gray at the temples, and there were deep lines around his eyes and mouth. His beard was untrimmed, his clothes were worn and stained, and the shadows under his eyes spoke of many sleepless nights. But his eyes were the same gray as the winter sky, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a long moment neither of them moved. Then Lily dropped her gaze and muttered an apology to no one in particular, and hurried on to the common cell block. Her hands were shaking as she filled the trough. She did not look back. But that night, lying in her narrow cot in the servants' quarters, she could not stop thinking about the way he had looked at her. Not with anger, not with contempt. He had looked at her as though she were the first real thing he had seen in a very long time. The next evening, she spilled the water again. This time, she did not trip. She simply let the pail tip, just slightly, as she passed his cell, just enough for a small puddle to form on the stones, just enough for him to see. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes straight ahead, her heart pounding in her chest like a trapped bird. But she heard it, a soft sound, almost lost in the dripping of water and the distant footsteps of the guards above. A breath, a shift of weight. He had noticed. The third night, she did it again, and the fourth, and the fifth. It became a ritual. Every evening, at the same hour, Lily carried the pail down the lower corridor, and every evening she spilled a small amount of water just outside the Alpha King's cell. The guards never noticed. They were too busy playing cards at the top of the stairs, too bored with the routine to pay attention to a servant girl and her water pail. But he noticed. She knew he did. because on a seventh night, when she walked past, she saw that the puddle from the night before had been disturbed. A footprint pressed into the damp stone. He had moved. He had stepped closer to the bars. It was a small thing, a tiny thing, but it felt like a crack in a wall that had seemed impenetrable. Lily did not know why she kept doing it. She told herself it was nothing, just a clumsy habit, just a careless spill. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wanted him to know that someone saw him, that someone remembered he was not just a prisoner, not just a fallen king, but a man. She was not a brave person. She had never been brave. She was the youngest of the kitchen maids, the one who mended the cook's aprons and scrubbed the pots after supper. She did not speak out of turn. She did not draw attention to herself. She had learned, long ago, that the safest way to survive in a castle full of powerful people was to be invisible. But every evening for a few seconds, she let herself be seen. On the 10th night, the guards changed the schedule. A new man was posted at the top of the stairs, a younger guard with a sharp face and suspicious eyes. He watched Lily as she passed, and she felt his gaze on her back like a cold draft. She walked past the Alpha King's cell without spilling a drop. The water stayed in the pail, the stones outside his bars remained dry. And that night, as she lay in her cot, she felt a strange ache in her chest, a hollow feeling, like she had forgotten something important. The next evening, the sharp-eyed guard was still there. Lily walked past with her pail, her hands steady, her eyes fixed on the ground. She did not spill, but as she reached the end of the corridor, she heard it. A sound she had never heard from that cell before. A voice. Low, rough, barely more than a whisper. "Girl." She stopped. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She turned slowly and looked back. The Alpha King was standing at the bars. He was gripping the iron with both hands, the chains hanging loose from his wrists. His face was half in shadow, but she could see his eyes, those gray, winter sky eyes, fixed on her with an urgency that made her mouth go dry. "You forgot," he said. The words hung in the air between them. Lily opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. She could hear the guards laughing upstairs, the clatter of pots from the kitchen, the distant bark of a dog in the courtyard. The whole world was going on as usual, and here she was, standing in a dark corridor being spoken to by a fallen king who had been silent for 6 months. She did not know what to say. She did not know what he meant, but she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she would not forget again. She nodded, just once. A small, almost invisible movement. Then she turned and walked away, her hands trembling around the handle of the empty pail. The next evening, the sharp-eyed guard was gone. The old guard was back, shuffling through his deck of cards at the top of the stairs. Lily carried the pail down the corridor. She walked past the Alpha King's cell, and she let the water spill. The puddle spread across the stones, dark and glistening in the torchlight. And from inside the cell, she heard a sound that might have been a breath, or a sigh, or the smallest, quietest, most human sound she had ever heard from a king. She did not look back, but she smiled, just a little, as she walked on. The next morning, Lily woke before dawn, as she always did. The servants' quarters were cold, the straw mattress thin, but she had learned long ago not to complain about things that could not be changed. She dressed in silence, pulling the same worn woolen dress over her head, the fabric soft from years of washing. Her hands moved automatically, tying the apron strings, tucking stray strands of hair under the cap, checking that her shoes were laced. These were the motions of a life lived in the margins, a life designed to be overlooked. The kitchen was already busy when she arrived. Fires crackled in the great hearths, pots hissed with boiling water, and the head cook, a broad rowan named Marta, barked orders at the junior staff. Lily slipped into her place at the washing trough, dipping her hands into the cold water without flinching. "Late again, Lily?" Marta called over her shoulder, but there was no real anger in it. "No, ma'am. On time." "Good. The East Wing needs fresh water by midday. And don't let that new guard give you trouble, the one with the narrow eyes. He's been sniffing around the lower corridors, asking questions. Lily's hands stilled in the water. What kind of questions? Marta shrugged, her heavy shoulders lifting and falling. The kind that gets people thrown in the cells if they answer wrong. Just keep your head down and your mouth shut. You know how it works. Lily nodded and returned to her work, but her mind was no longer on the dishes. The sharp-eyed god was back. She had hoped he was gone for good, reassigned or dismissed. But Marta's words confirmed her fears. He was still here, still watching, still looking for something to report. She spent the morning scrubbing pots and pans, her thoughts circling the same question. How long could she keep the ritual going without being caught? 10 days had passed without incident, but 10 days was not forever. Eventually, someone would notice the small puddle outside the Alpha King's cell, the wet footprints leading away, the way she always lingers just a moment too long in that corridor. But she could not stop. Not now. Not after he had spoken to her. The memory of his voice, low, rough from disuse, but unmistakably human, kept replaying in her mind. You forgot. 3 words, that was all. But they had changed something between them, turned her secret act into something shared, acknowledged. He knew. He had always known. And he had chosen to speak, to let her know that he knew. She did not understand why that matters so much, but it did. By late afternoon, the kitchen had quieted. Marta dismissed the younger staff for a brief rest before the evening meal, and Lily retreated to a small alcove near the pantry, where the light was dim and no one would look for her. She sat on an upturned crate, her back against the cold stone wall, and closed her eyes. She thought of the first time she had spilled the water. It had been an accident, truly. She had been carrying a full pail to the east wing, her arms aching from a long day's work, and she had stumbled over a loose stone in the corridor. The water had sloshed over the rim, splashing across the floor just outside the cell door. She had frozen, expecting a shout, a curse, some sign of anger from the prisoner within. But there had been only silence. She had hurried to clean it up, her heart pounding, certain that someone had seen, that she would be punished. But no one came. The guard at the top of the stairs was absorbed in his cards, and the corridor remained empty. The next night, she had done it again, on purpose. She could not explain why. Perhaps it was guilt. Guilt for the part she had played, however small, in the chaos that had brought the Alpha King to this dungeon. Perhaps it was something else, something she did not have words for. But she had let the water spill, a small offering, a silent message that someone in this cold, dark place remembered that he was a man, not just a prisoner. And he had remembered her. She opened her eyes and looked down at her hands. They were red from the cold water, the knuckles rough and cracked. These hands had scrubbed floors, carried buckets, mended linens. They were not the hands of a hero or a conspirator. They were the hands of a kitchen girl, invisible and unimportant. But those same hands had carried water to a king, and that king had noticed. The evening bell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She stood, straightened her apron, and made her way back to the kitchen. The second shift was beginning, and there was work to be done. The hours passed slowly. The evening meal was served, the dishes cleared, the fires banked for the night. Lily moved through her tasks with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done them 1,000 times before, her mind half at her work, half on the corridor below the castle. When the clock struck 10, she picked up the empty pail and headed for the well. The courtyard was dark and cold, the moon hidden behind a layer of clouds. She drew the water slowly, letting the bucket fill to the brim, feeling the weight of it in her arms. The water was cold enough to numb her fingers, but she did not hurry. She wanted it full. She wanted it to spill. She carried the pail through the servants' entrance and down the narrow staircase, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The corridor was dim, lit only by a single torch at the far end. She could see the guard at the top of the stairs, the old guard with his worn deck of cards, and she allowed herself a small breath of relief. But as she rounded the corner, she saw something that made her stop. The sharp-eyed guard was standing at the entrance to the lower corridor, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the darkness ahead. He was speaking to someone, Another guard, perhaps, for a servant she did not recognize. Their voices were low, too low for her to make out the words, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. Lily pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. If he saw her, if he saw the pail, if he asked what she was doing down here at this hour. She waited, counting her breaths. 1, 2, 3, 4. The voices continued. The sharp-eyed god laughed, a short, harsh sound, and then he turned and walked in the opposite direction, disappearing around a corner. Lily did not move until the sound of his footsteps faded completely. Then she slipped forward, her steps quick and silent, until she reached the cell door. She did not look inside. She did not speak. She simply let the pail tilt, letting the water spill across the stones in a wide, gleaming arc. The puddle spread, dark and wet, catching the flicker of the distant torchlight. She waited, and then from inside the cell, she heard his voice again. Not the 3 words from last night, but something different, something softer. The new guard, he watches the stairs at midnight. Lily's breath caught. He was warning her. He was telling her when to avoid the corridor, when the danger would be greatest. She did not know how to respond. She could not stay. The risk was too great. But she could not leave without acknowledging his words, without letting him know that she understood. She bent down, her fingers brushing the wet stones. She traced a single word in the water, the letters thin and quickly fading. Star. Thank you, Star. Then she stood, picked up the empty pail, and walked away without looking back. She did not know if he saw the word before it vanished. She did not know if it mattered. But as she climbed the stairs and stepped back into the dim light of the castle, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt seen. The next morning came too quickly. Lily woke before the first bells, her body heavy with a fatigue that sleep had not touched. She had lain awake for hours after returning from the lower corridor, replaying the moment over and over, the thin letters fading on wet stone, the silence that followed, the weight of what she had written and what she had left unwritten. She had thanked him, but she had not told him why she was sorry. Now she pulled on her worn dress, tied her apron tight, and braided her hair with fingers that trembled slightly. The castle was still dark, the corridors empty except for the distant footsteps of the night patrol. She had a plan, a small one, a foolish one, perhaps, but it was the only thing she could think of. She walked to the kitchen with purpose, her steps measured, her face calm. The kitchen maids were already at work, stoking the fires and preparing the morning bread. They barely looked up when she entered. She was part of the routine now, a familiar shadow moving through the early hours. "More water for the floors?" one of them asked without interest. "Yes," Lily said. "The lower corridor again." The maid shrugged and gestured toward the bucket. Lily filled it at the well in the courtyard, the cold water splashing against her hands and soaking the hem of her apron. She carried it back inside, her arms arcing from the weight, her mind racing with calculations. She could not go at midnight. The Danya had warned her. The new guard watched the stairs then. But the morning shift was different. The old guard who played cards with his men would be at the upper post, and the corridor would be quiet until the bells rang for the first meal. She had a window, a narrow one. She walked down the stone stairs slowly, her footsteps echoing in the narrow passage. The air grew colder, damper, carrying the familiar smell of moss and rust. She reached the bottom and turned the corner, her heart beating hard against her ribs. The corridor was empty. She let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. The torch on the wall had burned low, casting long shadows across the floor. She walked to the cell door and set the bucket down, her hands shaking as she dipped the rag into the water. She did not spill this time. She knelt, pressed the rag to the stones, and began to clean. The silence stretched. The cell was quiet. Too quiet. She glanced sideways at the bars, searching for a shape in the darkness, a sign that he was there. Morning. His voice was rough, hoarse from sleep, but there was a warmth in it that made her chest ache. "Morning," she whispered back. She kept cleaning, her movements slow and deliberate. She had thought about this all night, what she would say, what she would do. But now that she was here, the words felt too small, too fragile to carry the weight she wanted them to hold. So she did not speak. She simply worked, her rag tracing patterns across the wet stones, the water spreading and pooling in the cracks. "You came back," he said after a long moment. "I told you I would. Most people don't keep their word down here." She paused, her fingers tightening around the rag. "I'm not most people." "No," he said softly. "You're not." She felt the heat rise to her cheeks and focused on the floor, scrubbing harder than necessary. The silence returned, but it was not uncomfortable now. It was the kind of silence that held space for things unsaid, for the weight of words that were still forming. She finished the first section and moved to the second, her knees damp from the wet stones. She had planned to leave after this, to finish her task and retreat before anyone noticed she was gone. But her hands would not stop moving, and her feet would not carry her away. There was something she needed to do, something she had been too afraid to do last night. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small cloth bundle. She had wrapped it carefully, hiding it beneath the folds of her dress, knowing that if anyone searched her, she would have no excuse for carrying it. She stood up and walked to the bars of the cell. "I brought you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She held the bundle out through the bars, her hand trembling. For a long moment, nothing happened. She could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the cold air against her skin, could taste the fear at the back of her throat. Then a hand reached out of the darkness. His fingers brushed against hers as he took the bundle, and she felt the roughness of his skin, the warmth of his touch. She pulled her hand back quickly, but the feeling lingered, a ghost of contact that she could not shake. "What is this?" he asked. "Clean cloths," she said, "and a small jar of salve for your wrists." She had seen them last night, in the brief moment when the torchlight had fallen across his hands. The raw red marks where the iron cuffs had rubbed against his skin, the dried blood at the edges. She had not said anything then. She had not known how. But she could not stop thinking about it. She could not stop seeing the image of his wrists, bound and bleeding, every time she closed her eyes. "You shouldn't have," he said, his voice rough. "I know. Why did you?" She did not know how to answer that. She could not tell him about the guilt that gnawed at her, about the nights she lay awake wondering if she had been part of something terrible. She could not tell him that she was trying to make amends for a crime she had not fully understood, for a moment of cowardice that had changed everything. So she told him the truth, just a small part of it. "Because no one should have to sit in the dark with open wounds," she said. "Because it costs me nothing to help, and it costs you everything to ask." The silence that followed was different, heavier. She could feel the weight of his gaze through the darkness, could sense the shift in the air as he processed her words. "Thank you," he said finally. His voice was quiet, but there was something in it that she had not heard before. Something raw, something real. "You're welcome," she whispered. She picked up the bucket and the rag, ready to leave, but her feet would not move. She stood there, frozen, her back to the cell, her heart pounding. "There's something else," she said. She turned around, her eyes searching the darkness for his face. She could barely make out his shape, the broad shoulders, the dark hair, the glint of his eyes in the dim light. "I wanted to tell you," she said, her voice shaking. "I wanted to explain why I'm sorry, but I can't. Not yet. I don't know if I'll ever be able to." He did not respond immediately. She heard the sound of cloth shifting, the creak of the chains as he moved. "When you're ready," he said, "I'll be here." It was not a threat, it was not a demand. It was a promise, offered freely, without expectation. She nodded, even though she knew he could not see her. Then she picked up the bucket and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. She did not look back, but as she climbed the stairs, she felt the weight of his words settle over her like a blanket. He would be there. He would wait. And for the first time in 4 years, she believed that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be heard. The morning bells rang as she reached the top of the stairs. She stepped into the light of the castle, her hands empty, her heart full. She had done something good, something that cost her nothing and meant everything. She had remembered him. She had brought him comfort, and she had promised nothing except that she would keep coming back. As she walked through the kitchen, past the maids and the servants and the bustling activity of the castle, she carried the secret of what she had done like a flame burning in her chest. It was small, it was fragile, but it was hers, and no one could take it away. The day passed in a blur of chores and errands. Lily moved through her tasks mechanically, her mind elsewhere, her hands working on instinct. She scrubbed floors, carried water, fetched linens, all the while replaying the morning's encounter, the feel of his fingers against hers, the sound of his voice when he said, "Thank you." She was not foolish enough to think that one bundle of cloth and a jar of salve could change anything. He was still a prisoner. She was still a servant. The world was still cruel and indifferent to people like them. But something had shifted. Something had opened. She had reached out, and he had reached back. And that, she thought, was enough to keep going. That evening, as she prepared for bed, she found herself looking at her hands. The same hands that had carried the water, that had written the words on the wet stones, that had passed the bundle through the bars. She curled her fingers into a fist and held them against her chest. Tomorrow she would go again. Tomorrow she would find another way to help. And one day when she was ready, she would tell him the truth. She owed him that much. She owed herself that much, too. The candle flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Lily lay down on her thin mattress, staring up at the ceiling, her mind still spinning with thoughts of the man in the cell below. She did not know his full story. She did not know why he was there, or what he had done, or who had put him there. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not let him suffer alone. Not anymore. The fourth morning came gray and damp, with a mist that clung to the castle stones like a second skin. Lily woke before the first bell, her body already accustomed to the rhythm of the early hour. She dressed quickly, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency, and made her way down the narrow servants' stairwell toward the kitchens. The kitchen was already alive with activity. Cook Marta stood at the central table, her thick arms dusted with flour, barking orders at the 2 young kitchen girls who scurried about like mice. The fire in the great hearth crackled and spat, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Lily slipped in quietly, reaching for the wooden bucket that hung on its hook by the door. She had learned that the best time to draw water was before the castle fully woke, when the well in the lower courtyard was still undisturbed and the water ran clear and cold. "Off to the well again, girl," Marta called without turning around. "You've been fetching an awful lot of water these past days. The chambers ain't that dirty." Lily froze, her hand on the bucket handle. I've been helping with the washing in the lower hall," she said, the lie coming more smoothly than she expected. "The stone floors there collect dust, something terrible." Marta grunted, flipping a piece of dough onto the floured board. "Suit yourself. Just don't let Lady Margaret catch you slacking on your regular duties. She's got eyes like a hawk, that one." "Yes, cook," Lily said, and slipped out the door before Marta could ask any more questions. The lower courtyard was empty, the mist curling around the cobblestones like a living thing. Lily filled the bucket at the well, the cold water splashing against her hands and sending a shiver up her arms. She paused for a moment, listening. The castle was quiet, save for the distant clatter of the kitchen and the faint murmur of voices from the guard tower. She checked the bundle hidden in the folds of her apron. The cloth strips were still there, clean and folded, along with a small pot of salve she had managed to trade for from the old herb woman who visited the village every market day. The herb woman had asked no questions, simply taken the 2 copper coins and handed over the pot with a knowing nod. Lily had not told anyone what she was doing. She had not dared. The walk to the dungeons felt shorter today. Her feet knew the way now, tracing the familiar path through the narrow corridors and down the winding stone steps. The torchlight flickered as she passed, casting dancing shadows on the damp walls. Old Garrett was at his post, seated on the wooden stool with his back against the wall. His eyes were closed, his chin resting on his chest, but Lily knew better than to assume he was asleep. The old guard had a way of knowing things, of seeing without looking. "Morning," she said softly as she passed. Garrett's eyes cracked open, just a slit. "You're early." "Couldn't sleep," she said, which was true enough. She had lain awake for hours the night before, replaying the moment she had passed the bundle through the bars, the look in Nathaniel's eyes when he had taken it. Garrett grunted and closed his eyes again. "Mind you don't wake the rats. They've been restless lately." It was not a warning. It was not permission either. It was simply a statement, an acknowledgement that the old guard had noticed her coming and going and had chosen not to stop her. Lily took it as the gift it was. The corridor to Nathaniel's cell was darker than usual, the nearest torch having burned low. She carried her own candle, the small flame casting a pool of warm light around her feet. She rounded the final corner and saw him standing at the bars, waiting. He looked different today. His hair was damp, as if he had found some way to wash it, and the dark circles under his eyes seemed less pronounced. The cloth strips she had given him were wrapped around his wrists, clean and white against his weathered skin. "You came back," he said, and there was something in his voice that Lily could not quite name. Relief, perhaps, or surprise. "I said I would," she replied, setting the bucket down. "I brought water for washing, and more salve." Nathaniel's eyes moved to the bundle she pulled from her apron, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You're going to spoil me." "I doubt a few strips of cloth and a pot of salve count as spoiling," she said, trying to sound light. She knelt beside the bucket and dipped the cloth into the water, wringing it out. "But it's a start." She passed the wet cloth through the bars, and he took it, his fingers brushing hers for just a moment. The contact was brief, but Lily felt it all the same, a warmth that spread from her hand up her arm. He pressed the cloth to his face, closing his eyes as the cool water touched his skin. "I forgot what clean felt like," he murmured. Lily watched him, struck by the simple humanity of the moment. This was not the Alpha King she had heard whispers about, the feared ruler who commanded armies and held the fate of kingdoms in his hands. This was a man, tired and wounded, finding comfort in a wet cloth and a small act of kindness. "There's something else," she said, reaching into her apron again. She pulled out a small piece of bread wrapped in a clean napkin. "It's not much, just a bit from the kitchen, but I thought you might be hungry." Nathaniel opened his eyes and looked at the bread. For a long moment he did not move. Then he reached through the boughs and took it, his hand trembling slightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "You have no idea what this means." Lily shook her head. "It's just bread." "It's not just bread," he said, and his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "It's a reminder that I'm still a man, that someone out there still sees me as one." They sat in silence for a while, Nathaniel eating the bread slowly, savoring each bite, while Lily busied herself with wringing out another cloth. She passed it to him, and he used it to clean his face and neck, the water running in dark rivulets down his chest. "You've been coming here for 4 days now," he said, finishing the last of the bread. "The guards haven't noticed?" "The guards on this level are old," Lily said carefully. "They don't see much beyond their own noses." "And the others? The ones with sharper eyes?" Lily hesitated. She thought of the guard with the sharp features and the thin, cruel mouth, the one who had looked at her with such suspicion on the second morning. She had not seen him since, but she knew he was still there, somewhere in the castle, watching. "I'm careful," she said. "I know when to move and when to stay still." Nathaniel studied her for a moment, his gray eyes unreadable. "You're brave, Lily, braver than you know." "I don't feel brave," she admitted. "I feel like I'm one wrong step away from disaster." "That's what bravery is," he said quietly. "Doing what you believe is right, even when you're afraid." Lily looked down at her hands, at the calluses on her palms from years of hard work. "I'm not doing this because I'm brave. I'm doing it because—" She stopped. The words caught in her throat, the truth of her guilt pressing against her chest like a weight. "Because?" Nathaniel prompted gently. "Because I owe you," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I don't know how or why, but I owe you. And I can't explain it any better than that." Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. Then he reached through the bars and placed his hand over hers, his fingers warm and strong. "Whatever it is you think you owe me," he said, "you've already paid it back 10 times over." Lily's eyes stung, and she blinked rapidly to keep the tears at bay. "That's not how debts work." "Maybe not," he said, "but that's how grace works." They sat in the dim torchlight, hands touching through the bars, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed to lift. Lily felt lighter, as if a burden she had been carrying for years had been shared, if only a little. A sound echoed from the corridor above, a footstep heavy and deliberate. Lily's heart jumped into her throat and she pulled her hand back, scrambling to her feet. "Someone's coming," she whispered. Nathaniel's expression hardened, the vulnerability vanishing behind a mask of stone. "Go, quickly." Lily grabbed the bucket and the empty bundle, her hands shaking. She turned to leave, then paused, looking back at him. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll come again tomorrow." Nathaniel's eyes softened, just for a moment. "I'll be here." She fled down the corridor, her footsteps echoing in the narrow space. She rounded the corner just as a figure appeared at the top of the stairs. The guard with the sharp features, his eyes scanning the dungeon with cold precision. Lily pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. The guard paused, his gaze sweeping the corridor below. For a terrible moment she thought he would come down, that he would find her, that everything would be over. But then he turned and continued on his way, his footsteps fading into the distance. Lily let out a shaky breath and leaned against the wall, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to be more careful, she knew that now. But she also knew with a certainty that burned in her chest that she would not stop. Not until Nathaniel was free. Not until she had paid her debt in full. She did not know what that would cost her, but she was beginning to understand that some debts were worth any price. The 5th morning came with a frost that clung to the window panes of the servants' quarters. Lily woke before the first bell, her body already accustomed to the rhythm of early rising. She dressed quickly, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency as she laced her boots and tied back her hair. She had slept poorly. The image of the sharp-featured guard lingered at the edges of her dreams, a shadow that refused to fade. She knew she had been lucky yesterday. Luck would not last forever. But neither could she stop. She made her way to the kitchens, where cook Marta was already kneading dough for the morning bread. The old woman glanced up as Lily entered, her flour-dusted hands never pausing in their work. "You're early again," Marta said, her voice carrying no judgment, only observation. "I couldn't sleep," Lily admitted, reaching for the bucket she had hidden behind the flour sack the night before. Marta's eyes followed her movements. "That bucket's been seeing a lot of use lately." Lily's hands stilled for just a moment. She had prepared for this question, had rehearsed her answer in the dark hours before dawn. "The stable hands have been sloppy. I've been cleaning up after them." It was a weak lie, and she knew it. But Marta simply nodded, her expression unreadable. "Be careful, girl," the old woman said softly. "Some messes aren't meant to be cleaned by one pair of hands." Lily met her gaze, and for a moment she thought she saw something in Marta's eyes. Knowledge, perhaps, or warning. But she could not afford to ask. She could not afford to know. "I will," Lily said, and she meant it. She filled the bucket with water from the kitchen well, added a small measure of salt. She had learned that salt helped with healing, had traded a week's worth of bread for a small pouch of it from the village healer, and slipped out the back door before anyone could ask more questions. The corridor was quiet. The morning shift had not yet fully taken hold, and the guards who manned the upper levels were still groggy from the night watch. Lily kept her head down, her footsteps soft against the stone floor, the bucket swinging gently at her side. She passed the main hall, where a few servants were lighting the morning fires. She passed the armory, where a young squire was polishing a knight's breastplate. She passed the chapel, where the morning prayers had already begun, the sound of chanting echoing through the stone walls. And then she reached the stairway that led down. She paused at the top, her heart beating a familiar rhythm of fear and determination. The sharp-featured guard was not here. The corridor below was empty, lit only by the flickering torches that lined the walls. She descended. The dungeon corridor stretched before her, silent and cold. The cells on either side were empty now, their former occupants either dead or transported to the labor camps in the Eastern Territories. Only one cell remained occupied. Only Nathaniel. She reached his cell and set down the bucket, her hands trembling slightly as she knelt. The bars loomed before her, dark and unyielding. "Nathaniel," she whispered. There was a moment of silence, and then she heard the rustle of straw as he moved. He appeared at the bars, his face emerging from the shadows. He looked better than he had on the first day. His hair was cleaner, his eyes clearer. The bruises on his face had begun to fade, the swelling around his cheekbone reduced. "You came back," he said, and there was something in his voice, surprise, perhaps, or gratitude. "I told you I would," Lily said. She reached for the bucket, but before she could lift it, Nathaniel's hand shot through the bars and caught her wrist. The touch was sudden, unexpected. Lily froze, her breath catching in her throat. His fingers were warm against her skin, calloused from years of sword work, but gentle in their grip. "Wait," he said, his voice low. "Before you do anything else, I need to ask you something." Lily looked up at him, her heart pounding. His eyes held hers, and she saw something in them that she had not seen before, vulnerability, raw and unguarded. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you keep coming back?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lily opened her mouth to speak, but the words would not come. She had prepared for many questions, about the water, about the guards, about the outside world, but she had not prepared for this. "I told you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I owe you a debt." "A debt for what?" Nathaniel pressed, his grip on her wrist tightening slightly. "You've never told me what I did for you. You've never explained why a servant girl would risk her life for a prisoner she doesn't know." Lily looked away, her eyes fixed on the stone floor. The truth sat heavy in her chest, a weight she had carried for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. "I can't tell you," she said. "Why not?" "Because—" She struggled to find the words. "Because if I tell you, you'll hate me, and I don't think I could bear that." Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he released her wrist, but he did not pull his hand back. Instead, he let it rest on the bars, his fingers curling around the cold iron. "I don't think I could hate you," he said softly. "Not the way you've done for me." Lily looked up at him, and she saw that his eyes were kind. There was no judgment in them, no anger, only curiosity, and something that looked almost like understanding. "You don't know what I've done," she said. "And you don't know what I've done," he replied. "We all have shadows, Lily. We all have things we wish we could undo. But that doesn't mean we stop being worthy of grace." The word hit her like a blow. Grace. He had used it before, on the third morning when she had brought him the bread. She had not understood it then. She was not sure she understood it now. But she wanted to. She reached into the bucket and pulled out the cloth she had brought, clean, damp, scented with lavender oil she had traded for a day's wages. She pushed it through the bars. "Here," she said, "for your face. The oil helps with the bruising." Nathaniel took the cloth, his fingers brushing against hers. The touch was brief, but it sent a warmth through her that she could not explain. "Thank you," he said. He pressed the cloth to his cheek, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was a softness in his gaze that had not been there before. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "You didn't have to come back. You could have stayed in the kitchens, kept your head down, pretended you never saw me, but you didn't." "No," Lily said, her voice steady now. "I didn't." "Why?" She took a deep breath. She could not tell him the whole truth. Not yet, but she could give him a piece of it. "Because when I look at you, I see someone who has been forgotten," she said. "And I know what that feels like." Nathaniel's eyes widened just slightly. He studied her face, as if seeing her for the first time. "You've been forgotten too," he said. It was not a question. Lily nodded. "My mother died when I was 12. My father was a soldier in the king's army. He died when I was 14. I had no one. I was sent to the castle as an orphan, given a place in the kitchens because the cook took pity on me. I've been invisible my whole life. And now you're risking that invisibility for me." "Yes." He was silent for a long moment. Then he reached through the bars again, his hand moving slowly, deliberately. He placed his palm against the cold iron, his fingers spread wide. Lily looked at his hand, then at his face. She did not understand what he was asking. "Give me your hand," he said softly. She hesitated. Then slowly, she reached up and placed her hand against his, palm to palm, the cold iron bars between them. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "I see you, Lily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see you." The words broke something inside her. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden, and she could not stop them. She had not cried in years, had not allowed herself to cry, had told herself that tears were a luxury she could not afford. But here, in the darkness of the dungeon, with a fallen king holding her hand through the bars of his cell, she could not hold them back. She cried silently, her shoulders shaking, her tears falling onto the stone floor. Nathaniel did not let go. He held her hand through the bars, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Let it out," he said. "You've been holding it for too long." And she did. She let the tears come, let the grief and the guilt and the fear pour out of her in a flood that she could not control. She cried for her mother, who had died too young. She cried for her father, who had never come home. She cried for the girl she had been, invisible and alone. And she cried for Nathaniel, who had lost everything because of choices she did not yet understand. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled her hand back, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her dress. She felt raw, exposed, as if she had peeled back a layer of skin and shown him something she had never shown anyone. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. "Don't be," he said. "Don't ever apologize for feeling something real." She looked at him, and she saw that his eyes were wet too. He had not cried, not fully, but the emotion had touched him. "You're not the only one who has been forgotten, Lily," he said. "I was forgotten the day I was thrown in here. The world moved on without me. My enemies celebrated, my allies disappeared, and I sat in this cell, waiting for a death that never came." "Why didn't it come?" she asked. "Why are you still alive?" He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Because someone wants me to suffer. They want me to rot in here, forgotten and alone. They want me to die slowly, not quickly. That is the punishment they chose for me." "Who?" He shook his head. "It's better if you don't know. If they find out you've been helping me, they will do worse than throw you in a cell. They will make an example of you." Lily felt a chill run down her spine, but she did not back away. "I'm not afraid," she said. "You should be." "I am," she admitted, "but I'm more afraid of what I would become if I did nothing." Nathaniel studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "Then we are both afraid," he said, "but we are afraid together." He reached into the bucket and pulled out the bread she had brought, breaking off a piece and chewing it slowly. She watched him eat, a strange peace settling over her. She had come here to pay a debt, but she was beginning to understand that what she was building here was something more than repayment. It was a connection, a bridge between two lonely souls, built one act of kindness at a time. She stayed until the bell rang for the morning meal, then gathered her bucket and stood to leave. But before she turned away, she reached through the bars and touched his hand once more. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said. "I know," he said, and there was warmth in his voice. "I'll be waiting." She climbed the stairs, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She knew the danger was not gone. She knew the sharp-featured guard was still out there, watching, waiting. She knew that every visit brought her closer to discovery. But for the first time in a long time, she did not feel alone. And that, she realized, was worth any risk. The fifth morning came with a frost that clung to the window panes of the servants' quarters. Lily woke before the first bell, her body already accustomed to the rhythm of early rising. She dressed quickly, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency as she laced her boots and tied back her hair. The cold bit of her skin through the thin fabric of her dress, but she ignored it. She had learned long ago to ignore discomfort. She had slept poorly. The image of the sharp-featured guard lingered at the edges of her dreams, a shadow that refused to fade. She knew she had been lucky yesterday. Luck would not last forever. The thought pressed against her chest like a stone, heavy and cold. But neither could she stop. The need to go to him had become something more than obligation. It had become a pull, a quiet voice that grew louder each morning until she could no longer ignore it. She made her way to the kitchens, where cook Marta was already kneading dough for the morning bread. The old woman glanced up as Lily entered, her flour-dusted hands never pausing in their work. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm shadows across the stone walls. "You're early again," Marta said, her voice carrying no judgment, only observation. "I couldn't sleep," Lily admitted, reaching for the bucket she had hidden behind the flour sack the night before. She had prepared it carefully, a clean cloth soaked in lavender oil, a small pouch of salt, a piece of bread wrapped in linen. Marta's eyes followed her movements. "That bucket's been seeing a lot of use lately." Lily's hands stilled for just a moment. She had prepared for this question, had rehearsed her answer in the dark hours before dawn. "The stable hands have been sloppy. I've been cleaning up after them." It was a weak lie, and she knew it, but Marta simply nodded, her expression unreadable. The old woman's hands continued their work, pressing and folding the dough with practiced ease. "Be careful, girl," the old woman said softly. "Some messes aren't meant to be cleaned by one pair of hands." Lily met her gaze, and for a moment she thought she saw something in Marta's eyes. Knowledge, perhaps, or warning. The old cook had been at the castle for 40 years. She had seen kings come and go, had watched the rise and fall of powerful men. She knew things that she never spoke of. But Lily could not afford to ask. She could not afford to know. "I will," Lily said, and she meant it. She filled the bucket with water from the kitchen well, added the small measure of salt, and slipped out the back door before anyone could ask more questions. The morning air was crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and frost. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and hurried across the courtyard. The corridor was quiet. The morning shift had not yet fully taken hold, and the guards who manned the upper levels were still groggy from the night watch. Lily kept her head down, her footsteps soft against the stone floor, the bucket swinging gently at her side. She counted her steps, a habit she had developed to keep her mind calm. She passed the main hall, where a few servants were lighting the morning fires. She passed the armory, where a young squire was polishing a knight's breastplate. She passed the chapel, where the morning prayers had already begun, the sound of chanting echoing through the stone walls. The words were familiar, but they brought her no comfort. And then she reached the stairway that led down. She paused at the top, her heart beating a familiar rhythm of fear and determination. The sharp-featured guard was not here. The corridor below was empty, lit only by the flickering torches that lined the walls. She listened for footsteps, for voices, for any sign of danger. There was only silence. She descended. The dungeon corridor stretched before her, silent and cold. The cells on either side were empty now, their former occupants either dead or transported to the labor camps in the Eastern Territories. Only one cell remained occupied. Only Nathaniel. She reached his cell and set down the bucket, her hands trembling slightly as she knelt. The bars loomed before her, dark and unyielding. She could see him sitting in the corner, his back against the wall, his eyes closed. He looked peaceful, almost. "Nathaniel," she whispered. There was a moment of silence, and then she heard the rustle of straw as he moved. He appeared at the bars, his face emerging from the shadows. He looked better than he had on the first day. His hair was cleaner, his eyes clearer. The bruises on his face had begun to fade, the swelling around his cheekbone reduced. The lavender oil she had brought the day before seemed to have helped. "You came back," he said, and there was something in his voice, surprise perhaps, or gratitude, as if he had not allowed himself to believe she would keep her word. "I told you I would," Lily said. She reached for the bucket, but before she could lift it, Nathaniel's hand shot through the bars and caught her wrist. The touch was sudden, unexpected. Lily froze, her breath catching in her throat. His fingers were warm against her skin, calloused from years of fodder, but gentle in their grip. She could feel the pulse in his thumb, steady and strong. "Wait," he said, his voice low. "Before you do anything else, I need to ask you something." Lily looked up at him, her heart pounding. His eyes held hers, and she saw something in them that she had not seen before, vulnerability, raw and unguarded. The mask of the former king had slipped, revealing the man beneath. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you keep coming back?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lily opened her mouth to speak, but the words would not come. She had prepared for many questions, about the water, about the guards, about the outside world, but she had not prepared for this. "I told you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I owe you a debt." "A debt for what?" Nathaniel pressed, his grip on her wrist tightening slightly. "You've never told me what I did for you. You've never explained why a servant girl would risk her life for a prisoner she doesn't know. I have a right to know, Lily. I have a right to understand." Lily looked away, her eyes fixed on the stone floor. The truth sat heavy in her chest, a weight she had carried for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. She could feel it pressing against her ribs, demanding to be released. "I can't tell you," she said. "Why not?" "Because—" She struggled to find the words, the throat tight. "Because if I tell you, you'll hate me, and I don't think I could bear that." Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he released her wrist, but he did not pull his hand back. Instead, he let it rest on the bars, his fingers curling around the cold iron. His knuckles were white with tension. "I don't think I could hate you," he said softly. "Not after what you've done for me. Not after the way you've looked at me, as if I were still a man." Lily looked up at him, and she saw that his eyes were kind. There was no judgment in them, no anger, only curiosity, and something that looked almost like understanding. It was the same look her father had given her when she was small, after she had done something wrong and confessed it with tears in her eyes. "You don't know what I've done," she said. "Why not?" "Because—" She struggled to find the words, her throat taut. "Because if I tell you, you'll hate me, and I don't think I could bear that." Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he released her wrist, but he did not pull his hand back. Instead, he let it rest on the bars, his fingers curling around the cold iron. His knuckles were white with tension. "I don't think I could hate you," he said softly. "Not after what you've done for me. Not after the way you've looked at me, as if I were still a man." Lily looked up at him, and she saw that his eyes were kind. There was no judgment in them, no anger, only curiosity, and something that looked almost like understanding. It was the same look her father had given her when she was small, after she had done something wrong and confessed it with tears in her eyes. "You don't know what I've done," she said. "And you don't know what I've done," he replied. "We all have shadows, Lily. We all have things we wish we could undo. But that doesn't mean we stop being worthy of grace." The word hit her like a blow. Grace. He had used it before, on the third morning when she had brought him the bread. She had not understood it then, she was not sure she understood it now. But she wanted to. She wanted to understand how a man who had lost everything could still speak of grace. She reached into the bucket and pulled out the cloth she had brought, clean, damp, scented with lavender oil she had traded for a day's wages. She pushed it through the bars. "Here," she said, "for your face. The oil helps with the bruising." Nathaniel took the cloth, his fingers brushing against hers. The touch was brief, but it sent a warmth through her that she could not explain. It spread from her fingers to her chest, settling somewhere deep and quiet. "Thank you," he said. He pressed the cloth to his cheek, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was a softness in his gaze that had not been there before. He looked younger, somehow. Less like a king, more like a man. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "You didn't have to come back. You could have stayed in the kitchens, kept your head down, pretended you never saw me. But you didn't." "No," Lily said, her voice steady now. "I didn't." "Why?" She took a deep breath. She could not tell him the whole truth. Not yet. But she could give him a piece of it. She could let him see a part of her that she had kept hidden for years. "Because when I look at you, I see someone who has been forgotten," she said. "And I know what that feels like." Nathaniel's eyes widened just slightly. He studied her face as if seeing her for the first time. His gaze traveled over her features, searching for something. "You've been forgotten too," he said. It was not a question. Lily nodded. "My mother died when I was 12. My father was a soldier in the king's army. He died when I was 14. I had no one. I was sent to the castle as an orphan, given a place in the kitchens because the cook took pity on me. I've been invisible my whole life. People look through me, Nathaniel. They don't see me. And now you're risking that invisibility for me." "Yes." He was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the drip of water from somewhere deep in the dungeon, a steady, rhythmic sound that seemed to mark the passage of time. Then he reached through the bars again, his hand moving slowly, deliberately. He placed his palm against the cold iron, his fingers spread wide. Lily looked at his hand, then at his face. She did not understand what he was asking. "Give me your hand," he said softly. She hesitated. Her heart pounded in her chest, loud enough that she was sure he could hear it. Then, slowly, she reached up and placed her hand against his, palm to palm, the cold iron bars between them. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. His skin was rough, but his touch was gentle. "I see you, Lily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see you." The words broke something inside her. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden, and she could not stop them. She had not cried in years, had not allowed herself to cry. had told herself that tears were a luxury she could not afford. But here, in the darkness of the dungeon, with a fallen king holding her hand through the bars of his cell, she could not hold them back. She cried silently, her shoulders shaking, her tears falling onto the stone floor. Nathaniel did not let go. He held her hand through the bars, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. The gesture was small, but it felt like a lifeline. "Let it out," he said. "You've been holding it for too long." And she did. She let the tears come, let the grief and the guilt and the fear pour out of her in a flood that she could not control. She cried for her mother, who had died too young. She cried for her father, who had never come home. She cried for the girl she had been, invisible and alone. And she cried for Nathaniel, who had lost everything because of choices she did not yet understand. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled her hand back, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her dress. She felt raw, exposed, as if she had peeled back a layer of skin and shown him something she had never shown anyone. Her cheeks were wet, her nose running, but she did not care. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. "Don't be," he said. "Don't ever apologize for feeling something real." She looked at him, and she saw that his eyes were wet too. He had not cried, not fully, but the emotion had touched him. His voice was thick when he spoke again.
"You're not the only one who has been forgotten, Lily," he said. "I was forgotten the day I was thrown in here. The world moved on without me. My enemies celebrated. My allies disappeared. And I sat in this cell, waiting for a death that never came." "Why didn't it come?" she asked. "Why are you still alive?" He smiled, a sad, knowing smile that did not reach his eyes. "Because someone wants me to suffer. They want me to rot in here, forgotten and alone. They want me to die, slowly, not quickly. That is the punishment they chose for me." "Who?" He shook his head, his expression hardening. "It's better if you don't know. If they find out you've been helping me, they will do worse than throw you in a cell. They will make an example of you. They will hurt you in ways you cannot imagine." Lily felt a chill run down her spine, but she did not back away. She held his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I'm not afraid," she said. "You should be." "I am," she admitted, "but I'm more afraid of what I would become if I did nothing. I've been invisible my whole life, Nathaniel. I've watched terrible things happen and done nothing because I was too small, too weak, too afraid. I won't do that anymore, not with you." Nathaniel studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Respect flickered in his eyes. "Then we are both afraid," he said, "but we are afraid together." He reached into the bucket and pulled out the bread she had brought, breaking off a piece and chewing it slowly. She watched him eat, a strange peace settling over her. The dungeon no longer felt cold, the shadows no longer felt threatening. She had come here to pay a debt, but she was beginning to understand that what she was building here was something more than repayment. It was a connection, a bridge between two lonely souls, built one act of kindness at a time. It was fragile, but it was real. She stayed until the bell rang for the morning meal, then gathered her bucket and stood to leave. But before she turned away, she reached through the bars and touched his hand once more. His fingers closed around hers, brief but firm. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said. "I know," he said, and there was warmth in his voice. "I'll be waiting." She climbed the stairs, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She knew the danger was not gone. She knew the sharp-featured guard was still out there, watching, waiting. She knew that every visit brought her closer to discovery. But for the first time in a long time, she did not feel alone. And that, she realized, was worth any risk. The warning came not as a whisper, but as a presence. Lily felt it before she saw it, a shift in the air, a heaviness that settled over the stone corridor like a held breath. She had just filled her bucket at the well, the morning light pale and thin through the kitchen windows, when Cook Marta stepped into the doorway and stood there, watching her with an expression Lily had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not suspicion. It was fear. "Leave the bucket," Marta said, her voice low and flat. "Come with me." Lily's hands went cold around the wooden handle. She set it down carefully, her mind racing through possibilities, excuses, lies. But Marta did not wait for explanations. She turned and walked toward the pantry, her broad shoulders stiff, and Lily followed as though pulled by an invisible thread. The pantry was small and dark, filled with the smell of dried herbs and salted meat. Marta closed the door behind them and stood in the narrow space, her face half lit by a single candle on the shelf. "You've been seen," she said. The words landed like stones in Lily's chest. She opened her mouth, but Marta held up a hand. "Don't lie to me, girl. I've known for 5 days. You think I don't notice when salt goes missing? When the bucket takes twice as long to fill? When a kitchen girl who never speaks suddenly starts humming?" Lily's throat tightened. She had been so careful. She thought she had been so careful. "Who saw me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The sharp-eyed one, the guard with the scar above his brow. He came to the kitchen last night asking questions, not about the prisoner, about you. About the girl who walks past the lower cells with a bucket of water every morning, who stays too long, who comes back with wet sleeves and dry eyes." Marta's voice cracked on the last word, and Lily realized, with a shock that went deeper than fear, that Marta was afraid for her, not of her, for her. "I told him you were clumsy," Marta said. "I told him you spill water every time you pass that corridor, that I've scolded you for it a dozen times, that you're a simple girl with a good heart and no sense." She paused, and in the silence, Lily heard the unspoken weight of the lie Marta had told to protect her.
"He didn't believe me," Marta said quietly, "but he couldn't prove anything. Not yet." Lily's knees felt weak. She leaned against a sack of flour, her hands trembling. "Marta, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to drag you into this." "Hush." Marta's voice was sharp, but her eyes were wet. "You think I don't know what they're doing to him down there? You think I don't remember the day they dragged him in, bloodied and silent, his eyes like a wolf caught in a trap? I've worked in this castle for 30 years, Lily. I've seen kings come and go. I've seen justice and I've seen cruelty, and what's happening in that cell is not justice." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a fierce murmur. "I don't know what you're doing for him. I don't want to know. But I know you're the only light that's reached that man in 6 months. And if they catch you—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "If they catch you, they'll hang you, Lily. Hanging's what they do to girls who help prisoners. No trial, no mercy, just a rope and a crowd." The image hit Lily like a physical blow. She saw it, her own body swinging, her neck twisted, her hands bound. She saw Nathaniel watching from his cell, knowing it was his fault. She saw the sharp-faced guard smiling. "I know," Lily whispered. "I know the risk." "Then why?" Marta asked, and her voice was raw with genuine confusion. "Why risk your life for a man you barely knew 2 weeks ago? What is he to you?" Lily closed her eyes. The question hung in the dark pantry, and she felt the weight of it pressing against her ribs. She could have lied. She could have said she pitied him. She could have said she was just being kind. But Marta had just lied for her. Marta had put her own neck on the line. Marta deserved the truth. "I knew him before," Lily said. The words came out before she could stop them, and once they were spoken she could not take them back. She opened her eyes and saw Marta's face go still. "Before the fall," Lily continued, her voice barely audible. "Before he was king, before the rebellion. I was 12 years old and I was working in the great hall, scrubbing the floors after a feast. Everyone had gone to bed except the guards, and I heard footsteps behind me, heavy, uneven. I thought I was in trouble." She paused, the memory rising like water from a deep well. "It was him. Nathaniel. He was still just a prince then, not yet crowned. He was drunk, I think, or close to it. He stumbled and nearly fell, and I reached out to steady him without thinking.
I was just a kitchen girl. I shouldn't have touched him. I could have been beaten for it. But he didn't hurt you, Marta said softly. No, Lily shook her head. He looked at me, really looked at me, and he said, she stopped, her voice catching. He said, "You have kind hands, child. Guard them well." Then he walked away, and I never saw him again until they dragged him past the kitchen 6 months ago. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. "And that's it?" Marta asked. "That's why you're risking your life? Because he said one kind thing to you 12 years ago?" Lily met her eyes. "He saw me, Marta. No one saw me. Not my parents before they died. Not the other kitchen girls. Not the guards. No one looked at me and saw a person. But he did. For one moment, he looked at a 12-year-old girl scrubbing floors and saw someone worth speaking to. Someone with kind hands." Marta stared at her for a long time. Then she let out a breath that sounded like a surrender. "I don't know if that's the most foolish thing I've ever heard," she said slowly, "or the bravest." "Maybe both," Lily said. Marta laughed, a short, wet sound. "Probably both." She reached out and took Lily's hands in hers, squeezing them hard. "Listen to me, girl. I can't stop you. I can see that in your eyes. But if you're going to keep doing this, you need to be smarter. The sharp-eyed one will be watching. He'll change his patrols. He'll set traps. He might even follow you one night." Lily nodded, her heart pounding. "From now on, you don't go at the same time every day. You vary it. You take different routes. You carry the bucket even when it's empty. So if someone asks, you're just fetching water. And if you ever see the sharp-eyed one in that corridor, you turn around and walk away. No hesitation. No looking back." "I understand. And one more thing." Marta's grip tightened. "If they catch you, if it comes to that, you tell them you were acting alone. You never mention me. You never mention that you knew him before. You tell them you were just a foolish girl who felt sorry for a prisoner, and nothing more. Do you understand?" Lily wanted to argue. She wanted to say she would never betray Marta's trust, but the look in Marta's eyes told her this was not a request. It was an order, given in love.
"I understand," she said. Marta released her hands and stepped back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Good. Now get back to work. And Lily? Yes? Be careful." Lily nodded and slipped out of the pantry, her heart a storm of fear and gratitude. She picked up her bucket and went back to the well, her hands moving automatically while her mind raced. She had been seen, she had been noticed, and somewhere in the castle, the sharp-paced guard was watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. But she could not stop. Not now. Not when Nathaniel was waiting for her. Not when she had finally found a reason to feel alive again. She would be careful. She would be smart. She would vary her routes and change her timing. But she would not stop. She carried the bucket down the stone stairs at midday, when the guards changed shifts and the corridors were briefly empty. She kept her head down, her footsteps light, her ears straining for any sound that did not belong. She reached the cell door without incident. Nathaniel was standing at the bars, his hands wrapped around the iron, his face pale in the dim light. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're late," he said, but there was no accusation in his voice, only concern. "I know," she said, setting down the bucket. "There was a complication." His eyes sharpened. "Explain." She told him, quickly, quietly, about Marta's warning, about the sharp-faced guard, about the danger that was closing in around them. She did not tell him about the memory of 12 years ago. That was hers to hold for now. Nathaniel listened in silence, his jaw tightening with each word. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You should stop coming," he said finally. "No, Lily. No." She met his eyes, her voice steady. "I'm not stopping. I chose this. I know the risk. And I'm not leaving you alone in here." He stared at her, and something shifted in his expression. Something raw and unguarded.
"Why?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why do you care so much about a man who has nothing left to offer you?" She thought about the 12-year-old girl scrubbing floors. She thought about the prince who had seen her when no one else did. She thought about the weeks of silent visits, the salt water, the healing wounds, the conversations in the dark. "Because you matter," she said simply. "Because someone needs to remind you of that." His hands tightened on the bars. For a moment she thought he might argue, but instead, he lowered his head and let out a breath that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Then at least let me help you be smarter," he said quietly. "I know this castle better than anyone. I know the tunnels, the forgotten passages, the places where no guard ever looks. If you're going to keep coming, let me show you how to do it without being seen." Lily felt a flicker of hope. "You'd do that?" "I'd do anything to keep you safe," he said, and the words were so simple, so honest, that they made her chest ache. She reached through the bars and took his hand. "Then teach me." He smiled, a small, tired smile, but a real one. "Tomorrow, bring paper and charcoal. I'll draw you a map." She nodded, her heart full. The danger was still there. The sharp-faced guard was still watching, but for the first time she felt like she was not fighting alone. She stayed until the bell rang for the evening meal, then gathered her bucket and turned to leave. "Lily," he called after her. She looked back. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on me." She smiled. "I never will." And she climbed the stairs into the fading light, carrying with her the weight of a secret, the warmth of a promise, and the knowledge that the hardest part was yet to come. The next morning came with a sky the color of old pewter, heavy with clouds that promised rain but refused to deliver. Lily woke before the first bell, her stomach tight with a mixture of anticipation and dread. She had spent half the night lying awake, replaying Nathaniel's words, "I'll draw you a map," and wondering if she truly understood what she was agreeing to. She dressed quickly, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency, and slipped the roll of parchment she had stolen from the scribe's storage into the band of her apron. A stub of charcoal, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, went into her pocket. She checked herself twice in the cloudy surface of the wash basin, making sure nothing showed. The kitchen was already bustling when she arrived, but Marta caught her eye and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The old cook had positioned a large pot of stew near the back door, as if waiting for someone to take it to the guardhouse. A convenient excuse.
"Take this to the West Watch," Marta said loudly, her voice carrying across the kitchen. "They've been complaining about cold rations for 3 days. Let them see we haven't forgotten them." Lily took the pot, its warmth seeping through the cloth she wrapped around her hands, and made her way through the winding corridors of the castle. Her heart beat a steady rhythm against her ribs, but she kept her face calm, her steps unhurried. She had learned over the past weeks that the best way to move of notice was to look as though you had every right to be where you were. The staircase down to the dungeon was dark and cold, the air growing thick with the smell of damp stone, and something older, sadder. She paused at the bottom, listening. The sharp-faced guard was not at his post. She allowed herself a small breath of relief. Nathaniel was waiting for her, his hands wrapped around the bars of his cell, his eyes bright with something she had not seen before. Hope, perhaps? Or purpose? "You came," he said, and there was a warmth in his voice that made her chest tighten. "I said I would." She set the pot of stew aside, pulled out the parchment and charcoal, and knelt in front of his cell, close enough that their fingers could almost touch through the bars. "Teach me." He took the charcoal with a reverence that surprised her. His fingers, once strong and commanding, were thin now, the knuckles more prominent, but they moved with a steady precision as he began to sketch on the parchment. "The castle was built over 3 centuries, he said, his voice low as if he were telling her a secret. "The first foundation was a fortress. The second king expanded it. The third added the kitchens and the great hall. Each generation built on top of the old, and not all of the old was sealed."
He drew a rough outline of the castle's ground floor, then added layers beneath it, lines that twisted and branched like roots beneath a tree. "There are passages here," he said, tapping the charcoal against the parchment, "and here, and here." Some were sealed when the castle was renovated, but the seals are old, and stone crumbles with time. Lily leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. The map was crude, but it was a map, and it showed things she had never seen. A hidden stairwell behind the chapel, a tunnel that led from the old wine cellar to the eastern wall, a narrow crawl space that connected the guardhouse to the abandoned tower. "Why do you know this?" she asked, looking up at him. He smiled, a shadow of the smile she imagined he had worn as a young prince. "When you are a child in a castle, you explore. When you are a prisoner in that same castle, you remember every door you ever opened." She took the parchment from him carefully, as if it were made of glass, and studied the lines he had drawn. Her mind worked quickly, memorizing the positions, the connections, the names he had written in a neat, precise hand. "Which one is safest?" she asked. He pointed to a passage behind the chapel. "This one. It leads to the old well in the eastern courtyard. The entrance is hidden behind a loose stone in the confessional. No one uses it anymore. The priest is old and it does not like the cold." She traced the line with her finger. "And this one?" She pointed to a tunnel that ran beneath the guardhouse. "Too dangerous," he said. "The guards use the cellar for storage. You would be seen." She nodded, committing his words to memory. She had always had a good memory. It was one of the few things she was proud of, and she used it now, letting the map sink into her mind like ink into parchment. They worked for nearly an hour, going over every passage, every hidden door, every possible escape route. Nathaniel drew arrows in the margins, marking the places where the walls were thinnest, where the mortar was crumbling, where a determined person might break through if they had the right tools. "The tunnel behind the armory," he said, "is the most direct route to the outer wall. But it is also the most guarded. The captain keeps a patrol there at all hours." "Then we don't use it," she said. "No," he agreed. "We don't." She looked at him, at the way his shoulders had straightened, at the light in his eyes that had dimmed so much during his imprisonment. "You sound like you're planning something." He met her gaze, and for a moment she saw the man he must have been before, sharp, calculating, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with physical strength. "I am," he said, "but I need time, and I need you to stay safe." She folded the parchment carefully and tucked it into her apron. "I can take care of myself." "I know," he said, "but the guard with the scar, he has been asking questions. I heard him talking to the captain last night. He wanted to know why you come down here so often." Her blood ran cold. She had known it was coming, had felt the net tightening around her, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. "What did the captain say?"
"That he would speak to the head of the kitchen." Nathaniel's voice was quiet, careful. "He is watching you, Lily. You cannot come here every day. It is too dangerous." She wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. The sharp-faced guard had been suspicious from the beginning, and her frequent visits had only fueled his suspicion. She had been reckless, driven by guilt and a desperate need to do something good, and now she had put them both at risk. "Then I will come less often," she said, "but I will still come." He reached through the bars and took her hand, his fingers cold but firm. "I do not want you to risk yourself for me." "It is not just for you," she said, and she was surprised by the truth in her own words. "It is for me too. I need to do this. I need to believe that I can still be good." He held her gaze for a long moment, then released her hand. "Then be careful. And when you cannot come, remember what I have taught you. The map is in your mind now. That is safer than any piece of parchment." She nodded, gathered the pot of stew, and climbed the stairs, her heart heavy but her resolve stronger than ever. She did not see the sharp-faced guard standing in the shadow of the archway at the top of the stairs, watching her with cold, calculating eyes.
and she did not see the faint smile that curled the corner of his mouth as he turned and walked away. He had what he needed now. All he had to do was wait. The stew pot was heavier than usual that evening. Lily had filled it to the brim, more broth, more vegetables, a thicker cut of salted meat than she usually dared to take from the kitchen stores. She did not know why. Perhaps it was guilt, for she had not visited in 3 days. Perhaps it was fear, for she had heard that the sharp-faced guard had been asking questions about her to the kitchen maids. Or perhaps it was simply that she needed to feel useful again, and the only way she knew how was through the small, concrete act of bringing a meal to a man who had no one else. She took the back stairs, as she always did. The stone steps were worn smooth by centuries of feet, and she knew each one by heart. The 3rd step creaked, the 7th had a chip in the corner, the 12th was slightly narrower than the others. She counted them under her breath, a habit she had developed over the past weeks, a small ritual that grounded her. At the bottom, the corridor stretched before her, lit by a single torch that flickered in the draught. The cell door was where it had always been. The guard stationed outside was young, round-faced, with the kind of nervous energy that made him shift from foot to foot. He glanced at her, recognized her, and gave a small nod. "Evening," he said quietly. "He's been asking about you." Lily's heart gave a small lurch. Asking? Not in words, but he's been restless, pacing. He hasn't eaten much the past 2 days. The young guard hesitated, then added, "I think he was worried you weren't coming back." She swallowed. "I'm here now." She unlocked the door and stepped inside. Nathaniel was standing by the far wall, his back to her, his hands resting on the stone as if he were reading something written there. He did not turn when she entered, but his shoulders dropped slightly, a release of tension so subtle that she would have missed it if she had not been watching. "You're late," he said, his voice flat. "I know. I'm sorry." He turned then. His face was thinner than she remembered, the shadows under his eyes deeper. But there was something else in his expression, a sharpness, a vigilance that had not been there before. 3 days, he said. "I thought you had decided to stay away." "No, She set the stew pot down on the floor, her hands trembling slightly. "There's a guard, sharp face, thin lips, cold eyes. He's been watching me, asking questions in the kitchen. I needed to wait until I was sure he wasn't following me." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "The one I warned you about?" "Yes." He crossed the cell in 3 long strides, stopping close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His voice dropped to a low, urgent whisper. "He's not just watching you, Lily. He's been reporting to someone. I've seen him leave the dungeon and go straight to the East Wing, to the chambers of Lord Aldrich." "Lord Aldrich? The king's advisor?" "The same, the man who has been arguing for my execution since the day I was imprisoned here." Nathaniel's eyes burned with a cold fire. "If Aldrich knows about you, then the king knows. Or if not the king, then someone else who wants me dead." Lily felt the blood drain from her face. "What do I do?" "You leave, now, and you do not come back until I send word."
"But the map?" "Already done. You have it in your head. That is enough." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers with a gentleness that belied his urgency. "Lily, listen to me. If you are caught, Aldrich will not simply dismiss you. He will use you to get to me. He will question you. And if he decides you know something, he will not stop until he has pulled it from you by force." She looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his scarred, calloused fingers and her small, pale ones. "I can't just leave you here. You can, and you will." His voice softened, a crack in the armor. "I have waited 9 years. I can wait a little longer, but I cannot bear the thought of you being hurt because of me." She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could speak, the door to the cell flew open. The sharp-faced guard stood in the doorway, his thin lips curled into a smile that did not reach his eyes. Behind him, 2 other guards loomed, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. Well, well, the sharp-faced guard said, his voice dripping with false pleasantry. The little kitchen maid, paying her evening visit to the traitor. How touching. Lily's heart stopped. Nathaniel's grip on her hand tightened, but he did not move. His face became a mask of cold indifference, the same mask she had seen on the first day. She brings me my meals. It is the king's orders. Indeed it is, the guard said, stepping into the cell. His eyes swept over Lily, taking in her apron, her trembling hands, the stew pot on the floor. But I wonder if the king's orders also include the maps you have been drawing for her. Lily felt the world tilt. Nathaniel's voice was steady, almost bored. I have no idea what you are talking about. No? Then you will not mind if I search your little friend here. The guard reached out and grabbed Lily's arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. Come along, girl. Let us see what you are hiding. Take your hands off her. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a blade. Nathaniel had not moved, had not raised his voice, but something in his tone made the guard pause. I said, take your hands off her. The guard laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. You are in no position to give orders, traitor. Perhaps not. But I am in a position to tell the king exactly what I saw in your quarters 3 nights ago, when you thought no one was watching. The guard's face went pale. Nathaniel smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. I see you remember. Now release her, and I will forget what I saw. For now. The guard hesitated. His hand tightened on Lily's arm, then loosened. He shoved her away, and she stumbled, catching herself against the wall. Get out, he said, his voice low and venomous. Both of you. But know this, I will be watching, and when you slip, I will be there. Lily did not wait for Nathaniel to tell her to leave. She gathered the stew pot, her hands shaking so badly that the broth sloshed over the rim. She turned to Nathaniel, her eyes wide, her heart pounding. He met her gaze, and in that single look, she saw everything he could not say aloud. Go. Stay safe. Remember the map, and trust me. She nodded, barely, and fled. She ran up the stairs, her foot pounding against the stone, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She did not stop until she reached the kitchen, where she collapsed against the counter, her body trembling from head to toe. Marta looked up from the sink, took one look at her face, and crossed the room in 3 strides. What happened? Lily opened her mouth, but no words came. Marta grabbed her by the shoulders, her grip firm and steady. Lily, look at me. What happened? He knows, Lily whispered. The guard. He knows I've been visiting. He searched me. Nathaniel, he protected me, but... She broke off, a sob catching in her throat. I can't go back, Marta. He said I can't go back. Marta's face hardened. She pulled Lily into a rough embrace, her arms wrapping around her like a shield. Then you don't go back. You stay here. You stay safe. The map. Can wait. He can wait. You are no good to him dead, Lily. Marta pulled back, her eyes fierce. Do you understand me? You are no good to him dead. Lily nodded, tears streaming down her face. But even as she nodded, even as she let Marta lead her to a chair and press a cup of water into her hands, she knew the truth. She could not stay away. Not when she had the map in her head, not when she knew there was a way out, not when she had seen the hope in Nathaniel's eyes, buried beneath the fear and the cold mask. She would go back, but next time, she would be ready. She would not be caught. She would not let him down. The knock came at twilight, just as the last light bled from the sky. Lily knew who it was before Marta opened the door. She had felt it coming all day, a heaviness in her chest, a restlessness in her hands. The kind of knowing that came not from thinking, but from the bones.
The guard was the same one who had stopped her before, the one with the narrow eyes and the thin smile. He stood in the doorway of Marta's cottage, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, and he did not bother to look at Marta at all. His gaze found Lily immediately. "You," he said, "are coming with me." Marta stepped between them, her small frame blocking the doorway. "On what charge?" "I don't need a charge. I have orders from Lord Aldrich himself. And I have flour on my hands and a fire to tend." Marta did not move. "So unless you have a warrant signed by the king..." The guard grabbed her arm and shoved her aside. Marta stumbled into the table, sending a bowl crashing to the floor. Lily lunged forward, but the guard caught her wrist before she could reach the old woman. His grip was iron, his fingers digging into the soft skin beneath her sleeve. "You've been warned," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "Twice. There won't be a third." He dragged her out of the cottage and into the cold evening air. The lane was empty. The villagers had retreated behind their shutters, their candles extinguished. No one would see. No one would tell. They walked in silence through the narrow streets, past the well where Lily had drawn water 1,000 times, past the bakery where she had bought bread for her mother, past the church where she had knelt and prayed and begged for forgiveness that never came. The guard did not take her to the dungeon. He took her to the old chapel on the edge of the village, a crumbling stone building that had been abandoned for years. The door groaned open, and he pushed her inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of rotting wood. The chapel was not empty. A man sat on the stone steps that led to the broken altar. He was tall, lean, with silver-streaked hair and eyes the color of slate. His clothes were fine, dark wool and leather, a silver brooch at his collar. He did not stand when Lily entered. He simply watched her, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Lord Aldrich?" The guard closed the door behind them and stood with his back against it, his hands still on his sword. "Leave us," Lord Aldrich said without looking at the guard. The guard hesitated. "My lord." "She is a baker's daughter. What harm can she do?" Aldrich's lips curved, a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Wait outside. Do not let anyone approach." The guard bowed and slipped out, the door clicking shut behind him. Lily stood in the center of the chapel, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The dust motes swirled in the last light from the broken window, and she watched them, not daring to look at the man before her. "You have been visiting the prisoner," Aldrich said. His voice was calm, measured like a man discussing the weather. "Regularly. For weeks now." Lily said nothing. "I have been watching you, Lily Baker. I know about the water. I know about the bread. I know about the conversations that last far longer than they should." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "What I do not know is why." She kept her eyes on the dust motes. "He is a prisoner. I bring him water. It is my duty." "Duty." Aldrich laughed, a short, cold sound. "You think I believe that? A young woman unmarried, without protection, sneaking into the dungeon at all hours for duty?" He stood, and the sound of his boots on the stone floor was like a hammer striking an anvil. "No, there is something else. Something you are hiding." He walked toward her, slowly, deliberately, and she felt her body tense, felt the old instinct rise, the instinct to run, to hide, to make herself small. "The prisoner has a secret," Aldrich said, stopping just in front of her. "I can see it in his eyes. He is waiting for something, plotting something. And you are his messenger, his accomplice." "I am no one's accomplice," Lily whispered. "Then tell me what he is planning." "I don't know." "You lie." Aldrich's hand shot out and grabbed her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. His grip was hard, bruising, and she gasped at the sudden pain. "I have been patient," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I could have had you arrested. I could have had you tortured. I have not, because I thought you would come to your senses. I thought you would realize that protecting a traitor is the same as being one. His fingers tightened. But you have not come to your senses. You have only grown bolder. So I will ask you one more time, what is he planning? Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. She thought of Nathaniel's hands, gentle on her wrist. She thought of his voice, low and broken, when he had asked her to leave. She thought of the hope in his eyes, buried so deep that most people would never see it. She thought of the map, the passage, the plan, and she knew she could not betray him, not now, not ever. I don't know, she said again. Aldrich's face went still. For a long moment he simply looked at her, his eyes searching hers, then he released her chin and stepped back. Very well, he said. Then I will tell you what I know about you. Lily's blood turned cold. I know about your mother, Aldrich said. I know she died 2 winters ago. I know you were the one who found her. On the floor of your cottage, cold and still. He paused. I know you blamed yourself. I know you still do. Lily's breath caught. She felt the old wound tear open, felt the guilt surge up like bile in her throat. I know about the fever that swept through the village 3 summers ago, Aldrich continued, his voice soft, almost kind. I know your father was one of the first to fall ill. I know you nursed him for 10 days, day and night, until he recovered. And I know that while you were nursing him, your neighbor's child, the little girl with the red hair, the one who called you Auntie Lily, caught the fever too. Lily's knees buckled. She reached out and grabbed the back of a pew, steadying herself. You did not go to her, Aldrich said. You stayed with your father, and the girl died. No. The word escaped her lips before she could stop it, a broken whisper. Yes, you chose your father over her, and she died alone, in her mother's arms, asking for you. Aldrich's voice was flat, clinical, like a man reading a report. The mother, the widow, has never forgiven you. She speaks of you in the village. She calls you a coward, a selfish girl who let her daughter die. Lily was crying now, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking. She had not spoken of this to anyone. She had buried it so deep that she had almost convinced herself it did not exist. But it did. It was there, gnawing at her, every single day. That is why you go to the dungeon, Aldrich said. Not out of duty, not out of kindness, but out of guilt. You cannot save the ones who are gone, so you try to save the ones who are still here. You think that if you save him, you will be forgiven. He stepped closer and she flinched, expecting another blow. But he did not touch her. You are not a good person, Lily Baker, he said quietly. You are a guilty person, and guilty people make mistakes. They betray themselves eventually because they cannot bear the weight of what they carry. He turned and walked toward the door. I will give you one more chance. Tomorrow, at sunset, you will come to my chambers. You will tell me everything you know about the prisoner's plans, and I will consider letting you live. He paused at the door, his hand on the latch. If you do not come, he said, without turning around, I will have the guard arrest the old woman. Marta. I will have her charged with harboring a spy. And I will have her hanged before the week is out. He opened the door and stepped into the fading light. Choose wisely. The door closed behind him, leaving Lily alone in the crumbling chapel, her tears falling into the dust. She did not know how long she sat there. Minutes, hours. The darkness deepened around her, and the cold seeped into her bones, and she did not move. She thought of the little girl with the red hair. She thought of her mother's cold hand in hers. She thought of Nathaniel, of his voice, of the hope she had seen in his eyes. And she thought of Marta, old, kind Marta, who had taken her in without question, who had fed her and sheltered her and asked for nothing in return. She could not let Marta die for her. But she could not betray Nathaniel either. She pressed her forehead to the cold stone of the pew and wept. She was still weeping when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up, her eyes blurred with tears, and saw Nathaniel. He was standing over her, his chains gone, his face pale and bruised. Behind him, in the chapel doorway, stood a man she had never seen before, tall, dark-haired, with a scar running down his cheek. Nathaniel knelt beside her, his hands cupping her face, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "I heard everything," he said softly. "I heard all of it." Lily choked on a sob. "I killed her. I let her die. No." His voice was firm, gentle, cutting through her words like a blade through fog. "You did not kill her. You were a child, Lily. A child who was trying to save her father. You did what you had to do. I chose him over her. You chose the one who was still alive, the one who needed you most in that moment." Nathaniel's eyes were dark, intense, holding hers. "That is not a sin. That is survival. And the woman, the widow, she is grieving. She lashes out because she cannot bear her own pain. But that does not make you guilty." Lily shook her head. "You don't understand."
"I understand more than you know." He took her hands in his, and she felt the warmth of his skin, the strength in his fingers. "I have spent 10 years in that cell, Lily. 10 years, thinking about all the choices I made, all the people I failed. I know what guilt feels like. I know how it hollows you out, how it makes you believe that you are beyond redemption." He lifted her hands and pressed them to his chest, over his heart. "But I have also learned that guilt is not the end. It is not the final word. It is a door, and you can choose to walk through it, or you can let it crush you." He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. "You are not your worst choice, Lily. You are not the moment you failed. You are the woman who brings water to a prisoner every day, even when it costs her everything. You are the woman who memorizes maps and risks her life for a man she barely knows. You are the woman who cries for a child she could not save, even after 3 years." He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. "That is who you are, and that is who I love." The word hung between them, fragile and warm, like a candle flame in the dark. Lily stared at him, her breath caught in her throat. "I love you," he said again, his voice breaking. "I have loved you since the first day you spilled water on the floor and did not run away. I have loved you through every visit, every word, every silent moment, and I will love you until I die, which, if we do not leave this chapel soon, will be before sunrise." She laughed, a wet, broken sound, and threw her arms around him. He held her, his arms wrapping around her, his face buried in her hair. "I am not going to let Marta die," she whispered into his shoulder. "Neither am I," he said. "That is why we are leaving tonight." He pulled back and gestured to the man in the doorway. "This is Tomas. He was my captain before the fall. He has been waiting for my signal for 2 years." Tomas stepped forward, his scarred face splitting into a grim smile. "The passage is ready, my king. The horses are waiting, and I have a dozen men stationed at the south gate, ready to ride." Nathaniel turned back to Lily, his hand still holding hers. "Come with me," he said. "Leave this place. Leave the guilt and the fear and the weight of all you carry. Come with me, and let me carry it for you." Lily looked at his hand wrapped around hers. She looked at his eyes, dark and fierce and full of love. And she nodded. "Yes," she said. "Yes." They ran. They ran. The corridor twisted left, then right, then down a narrow staircase that Lily had never noticed before. Tomas led the way, his torch casting dancing shadows on walls slick with moisture.
The air grew cold and damp, carrying the smell of earth and stone and something older, the smell of freedom. Nathaniel's hand never let go of hers. They descended 3 flights of stairs, each one narrower than the last, until the stone walls gave way to rough-hewn rock. The tunnel widened into a natural cave, its ceiling lost in darkness above them. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, a steady, patient sound. "This passage runs under the eastern wall," Tomas said, his voice echoing. "It comes out in the old hunting grounds, half a mile past the outer sentry posts, the horses waiting at the ruins of the chapel." "How did you know about this passage?" Lily asked, her voice breathless. "The king told me," Tomas said, glancing back at Nathaniel. 2 years ago, before the fall. He said if ever the day came when he needed to disappear, this was the way. "He planned this," Lily said, looking at Nathaniel. "You planned this, even then." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I hoped I would never need it, but a wise king always prepares for the worst." "A wise king," she repeated, and something in her chest eased. He was not just a man who had been caught. He was a man who had always intended to survive. They moved through the cave in silence, their footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Lily's legs ached and her lungs burned, but she did not slow. Every step took her farther from the cell, farther from Aldrich, farther from the guilt she had carried for so long. The tunnel began to slope upward. A faint light appeared ahead, not torchlight, but the gray, watery light of early dawn. They emerged into a world of mist and silence. The hunting grounds stretched before them, rolling hills covered in knee-high grass, silver with dew. The sky was pale pink at the horizon, streaked with clouds that caught the first light of the rising sun. A light rain was falling, soft and gentle, washing the world clean. Lily stopped and breathed. For 3 years she had lived underground, in the castle, in the cell, in the shadows. She had forgotten what the sky looked like at dawn. She had forgotten how the air smelled after rain, fresh and alive and full of promise.
Nathaniel stood beside her, his face lifted to the rain. He looked different in the open air, taller, stronger, more like the man he must have been before the chains and the darkness. "The horses are this way," Tomas said, already moving toward a cluster of broken stone walls that rose from the mist like the bones of a giant. They followed him across the wet grass, their boots sinking into the soft earth. Lily's dress was soaked to the knees, her shawl clinging to her shoulders, but she did not care. The ruins of the chapel stood in a small clearing, its roof long gone, its walls covered in moss and ivy. Inside, 4 horses waited, their breath steaming in the cool morning air. A young man stood with them, his face familiar, one of the stable hands she had seen in the castle. "Your Majesty," the young man said, bowing. "The horses are saddled and ready. I've packed supplies for 3 days, dried meat, bread, water, and blankets." "You have my thanks, Marcus," Nathaniel said, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Your service will not be forgotten." Marcus's face flushed with pride. "It is an honor, my king." Nathaniel turned to Lily. "Can you ride?" She had not been on a horse in years, not since her father fell ill, but she nodded. "I can manage." He helped her mount, his hands gentle on her waist, and she settled into the saddle, the leather cold beneath her. The horse shifted beneath her, and she gripped the reins, finding her balance. Nathaniel mounted his own horse, a powerful black stallion that stamped the ground as if eager to run. Tomas and Marcus mounted as well, and together they turned toward the east, where the sun was beginning to break through the clouds. But Lily stopped. "Marta," she said, "I can't leave without knowing she's safe." Nathaniel's expression softened. "I have not forgotten her. Tomas, what word from the castle?" Tomas leaned forward in his saddle. "My men report that Aldrich has not moved against the widow yet. He is waiting for you to return to her. He believes you will not leave without her."
He is right, Lily said. I won't. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of risk against loyalty. Then he nodded. Tomas, send 2 men to the village. Tell them to watch the widow's cottage. If Aldrich's men approach, they are to bring her to the northern pass. We will wait there until nightfall. And if she refuses to come? Tomas asked. Tell her, Lily said, her voice steady. Tell her that Lily sent you. Tell her that I am sorry, and tell her that I am finally choosing to live. Tomas nodded and dispatched one of the riders, who turned his horse and galloped back toward the castle. They rode. The morning unfolded around them, slow and golden. The rain stopped, and the mist burned away, revealing a landscape of green hills and distant forests, dotted with farms and small villages. The world was waking up, smoke rising from chimneys, roosters calling, the distant sound of a dog barking. Lily had not seen this world in 3 years. She had forgotten how beautiful it was. They rode for hours, following narrow paths through the forest, staying away from the main roads. Nathaniel led the way, his eyes scanning the trees, alert for any sign of pursuit. But the forest was quiet, and the only sound was the steady rhythm of hooves on soft earth. Around midday, they stopped at a small stream to rest the horses. Lily dismounted, her legs trembling, and knelt by the water to drink. The water was cold and clear, tasting of stone and roots. Nathaniel sat beside her, his back against a tree, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. What happens now? She asked. We ride north, he said. There is a village in the mountains, 3 days from here. The people there are loyal to me. We will be safe there for a time. And then? And then I gather that strength. I reach out to the other clans, the ones who have stayed silent because they feared Aldrich. I remind them that I am still alive, still their king. And Aldrich? Nathaniel's eyes hardened. Aldrich will be dealt with, but not today. Today, we survive. She nodded, understanding. The war was not over, it was barely beginning. But for now, she was free. And he was free, and that was enough. They rode again as the afternoon lengthened, the shadows growing long and golden. The forest gave way to rolling meadows, and the meadows gave way to rocky hills, the path growing steeper and harder.
As the sun began to set, they crested a ridge and saw the village below. A cluster of stone cottages, smoke rising from their chimneys, surrounded by fields of barley and wheat. The mountains rose behind it, their peaks touched with the last light of the setting sun. We are here, Nathaniel said. They rode down into the village, and the people came out to meet them. They did not cheer, not at first. They stood in silence, watching, their faces a mixture of hope and fear and disbelief. Then an old woman stepped forward. She looked at Nathaniel, her eyes filling with tears. Your Majesty, she whispered, you are alive. I am, he said, dismounting. And I have brought someone with me. He turned and helped Lily down from her horse, his hands steady and warm. The old woman looked at her, curious. Who is this? Her name is Lily, Nathaniel said, and his voice carried across the village square. She is the one who saved me. She is the one who kept me alive, day after day, when I had given up all hope, and she is the one I love. The old woman smiled, and the tension in the square broke. People began to move, to approach, to reach out and touch Nathaniel's cloak as if to confirm he was real. Someone brought bread and cheese. Someone else brought a flask of ale. A fire was lit in the center of the square, and people began to gather around. Lily stood at the edge of the firelight, watching. She felt like a ghost, like she did not quite belong to this world yet. Then Morta appeared. She came through the crowd, her face pale, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She stopped when she saw Lily, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Morta, Lily said, her voice breaking, you're safe.
Morta crossed the distance between them and took Lily's hands in hers. Her hands were rough and warm, the hands of a woman who had worked hard all her life. "I heard what you did," Morta said. "I heard you chose to save him. I heard you chose to live." "I did." Morta nodded and something in her eyes softened. "Your father would be proud of you, Lily. He would be so proud." Lily's tears came then, hot and sudden, and she fell into Morta's arms, sobbing. Morta held her, her hand stroking her hair, and said nothing. They stood like that for a long time, two women who had both lost so much, holding each other in the firelight. Later that night, when the feast had wound down and the villagers had gone to their homes, Lily and Nathaniel sat on a stone wall at the edge of the village, looking up at the stars. "I never thought I would see the stars again," Lily said. "Neither did I," Nathaniel said. "But here we are. Here we are." He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "I meant what I said, Lily, in the village square. I love you." "I love you too," she said, and it was the first time she had said it without fear. They sat in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, and for the first time, in 3 years, Lily felt something she had almost forgotten. She felt hope. In the morning, they would ride into the mountains. There would be battles to fight, a kingdom to reclaim, a tyrant to overthrow. There would be hard days and harder choices. But tonight, under the stars, with his hand in hers, Lily let herself believe that it would be all right, because she was no longer alone, and neither was he. And so, dear listener, our story finds its rest, not in a perfect ending, but in a dawn worth walking into. Lily and Nathaniel are free, and love has won the first of many battles. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you feel that same warmth, that same quiet hope. Until next time, keep the fire burning.